And we are live, back with another Boxing Squared live stream. This one, the post-fight review, Tyson Fury, Deontay Wilder, the Trilogy encounter in Las Vegas. What a fight. This had a little bit of everything. There was a lot of drama, a lot of back and forth. Deontay Wilder almost had Tyson Fury. You know, he literally had him at his feet, almost out, drops him twice, but Tyson Fury, who had Deontay Wilder down in the third round, took over the fight and ultimately knocks out Deontay Wilder in the 11th round, defends his WBC title. So I've got a few people who've rolled into the chat. So hello, Liam. We've got Damien, Fistiana, Devonshire, Black Hatred, Liam Whitaker, Bruno, Peter Holland. Welcome one and all. Thank you for joining me wherever you are, morning, noon or night. What a fight. What a fight. I had a lot of fun watching that. Deontay Wilder said he was going to be improved, and he was. But the problem was, for all the improvements, which we did see in the opening couple of rounds, he had a 6-round strategy. It was effectively all or bust. And after about 6 rounds, he was gassed. You could see him starting round 4 onwards. And, you know, a lot of drama in this fight. I really liked what I saw from Deontay Wilder in that opening round. I gave him that opening round. Those jabs to the body, the right hand to the body, it was nice work. But Tyson Fury, whenever he was touching Deontay, and you sort of thought, this has got a very similar feel. And obviously the third round, he had Wilder down again. Big right hand, then follows up with an uppercut. Deontay Wilder hits the deck. And you're thinking, is this going to be a complete repeat? Same round, all that sort of stuff. And round 4, Deontay Wilder just hits the target. Tyson Fury is down, and he was hurt. He was hurt badly. And that second knockdown in that round, that sort of seemed to be more that he hadn't recovered and he was unsteady on his legs, and it really didn't sort of take much to get him down again. And you thought, is he going to beat the count here? Is Deontay Wilder going to take him out? Even at that point, Deontay Wilder was certainly on the tiring front. Sort of, you know, his gas tank was getting close to E. And by the 6th round, you sort of saw the writing was on the wall. Tyson Fury really starting to back up Deontay Wilder and just put it on him. And round 6 to 11, it effectively was a sustained beating that Tyson Fury meted out to Deontay Wilder. Really put it on him. Deontay Wilder, though, you have to say, he is a warrior. He showed the heart of a true warrior. He literally went out on his shield. Knocked out in the 11th round. So he also went down in the 10th. But that 11th round, Tyson Fury, you know, just a number of right hands. And the one that floored him, yeah, Deontay Wilder was all sorts of in trouble there. His eye had swollen up, almost completely see out of it. He had injured his hand a few rounds earlier as well, had some issues with that. Not sure. I'm sure we'll get some details in due course. But this was a great fight, a great performance overall by Tyson Fury. Had the drama, the seesaw nature. Those first 4 or 5 rounds, yeah, it was just all over the map. I was loving it. This is the sort of stuff we want to see in the heavyweight division. These sorts of fights. It's just a shame that Wilder couldn't sort of maintain it, but set ahead of the fight in the weigh-in video, coming in at 238, a weight which was a career heaviest. Obviously, that could potentially end up in him gassing in the fight. It's exactly what happened. A weight he's not accustomed to. He didn't look good at 231, which was his last fight against Fury. He looked gassed pretty early on in that fight too. But Tyson Fury, he stuck to the strategy. You know, he knew Deontay Wilder was going to come after him strong, and he just met the challenge. But, you know, he made some mistakes. He was sloppy in there, and obviously he ate some shots. And you have to say, Tyson Fury has a great chin, good powers of recovery, defends his WBC title for the first time. He has been much maligned in the past by some fans for not defending his previous titles that he'd won, etc. He now has a defense under his belt, and we're putting aside the lineal title, which is obviously a separate thing. So I'll just get to the comments here. What did you make of this fight? So drop your thoughts and, drop a comment loud and often, as they say. So I'll just get to closer to the chat. So Aunt Tifa says, okay, we're not going to talk about any other fight in this stream apart from the main event. I'll cover off the other ones in different videos. But fair to say that the Sanchez and Ajagba fight sucked the air out of the room. So what, what a great main event to sort of not save the event, but certainly, sort of put the stink of that co-main event out the window. So Shea says, early round 1, impressed with Wilder, then he seemed to revert to type partway through at end of round 3, thought we were in for a repeat of round 2. Yeah, he did really sort of stick to the strategy early on. You could see he looked improved. Even when he was starting to gas, at least of the first part, he was holding his shape a little bit, and he looked better than, I think the previous fight. But early on, that dedication to working the jab to the body, right hand to the body, I thought he looked really good. It was good work from Deontay Wilder. But like you did say there, he reverted to type. And some of that just was, he was really eating a lot of shots and taking a lot of punishment by Tyson Fury. That gas tank, assisted by the fact he was 238 pounds. And, let's face it, he's that sort of light bulb figure, very slender legs and too much weight up top. Ultimately, that extra muscle, it almost got the job done. I'm sure if he had got Fury out of there in round 4, people would be saying, what a great performance, it was the right strategy. So some of these things, can obviously, in hindsight, depending on how things go down, these things can turn on. But it was one of these sort of cases, ultimately the strategy didn't work. Tyson Fury rode out that storm. Obviously, Deontay Wilder continued to gas and he took over the fight. Just put a beating on him in that second half of the fight. So Luis says Wilder won't be the same. Maybe not. He certainly did. I mean, that people said the same after that first fight, but he did show that he'd obviously been putting some work in his training camp to try prepare a bit differently for Fury. Ultimately, though, he did sort of end up sort of letting it all sort of hang out to some degree. Him and Fury, it ended up getting pretty sloppy and loose after about round 5 or so. Indy says, bum squad. I actually think that's unfair. And the reason why is Deontay Wilder clearly showed heart there. But the thing is, if you're saying that Deontay Wilder's no good, how would you ever give credit to Tyson Fury? How could you give credit to him? Deontay Wilder did show a lot of heart in there. He is still one of the best heavyweights in the world. And if you don't think so, well, how could you give Fury any credit or rave about the performance? I don't understand why people want to do that. It's just ridiculous. Forrest says, it was a good fight, but if you're older than, 10, it's not the best heavyweight fight ever. Well, I'm not sure people are calling it the best heavyweight fight ever. Certainly, I think it is one of those fights that will be remembered for a long time. One of the better fights in terms of seesaw drama action in recent memory. Indy says Wilder's career at the top end is over. D says should have shook Fury's hand there. Bitter end to an amazing fight. Yeah, that was not great to see. I mean, in the interview, Tyson Fury did say Deontay Wilder refused to shake his hand when he went over there. I mean, there's a lot of bad blood there. A lot of bad blood, obviously, since the second fight. All sorts of excuses and other bits and pieces that popped up, the arbitration. This hasn't been a build-up that's been fun necessarily from the outside looking in, especially with some of the delusional excuses. And let's hope that at least Wilder and his fans, the hardcore fans that have been running interference, making up excuses left, right and centre, that they are going to accept that Deontay Wilder was beaten here, the better man won on the night. It'll do my head in if we have the same sort of thing. And I think people will just write them off as just idiots anyway, like they had the first time. So Spaghetti Legs says 3 fights, 3 wins. Lewis says Fury is the greatest. Antifa says stop trolling. Okay, not sure what that person said. So the chat's going pretty quick here, so I haven't managed to keep up with everything. General says Fury is too good under pressure. Well, that was one of the things that obviously when things were, even when it was a bit of a shootout in some of those early rounds sort of 3 to 5, Fury did remain composed and under pressure. He didn't buckle. Deontay Wilder seemed to be biting at everything. Fury just couldn't miss with the right hand. Obviously, one thing that was reaffirmed in this fight was Deontay Wilder cannot fight on the back foot. Every time Tyson Fury was pushing him back and he was on the front foot and applying pressure, he was having success. Deontay Wilder is clearly an on-top fighter. When he was the one who was able to sort of bring the pressure, come forward, he was having, his spots of success, best spots of success in this fight. But going backwards, he looked all at sea, off balance. And clearly he was getting beaten up and he was taking a lot of punishment. And I know someone just said before, is he able to, will he be the same? Will he recover from this? Well, I think he showed and probably earned, after all the shenanigans in the past 18 months or so, all the excuses, all the real dross, that he's come out with, he did prove he's a warrior. He put in a performance, especially early on. He showed that he had tried to make improvements. He had tried to be better, and I think he was better. He put in a decent shift, but obviously he gassed and then obviously was beaten up and taken out. But he went out on his shield, and he said that's what he wanted to do. And you did see the doctor sort of creeping up later in the fight, and the referee was concerned about that eye that was almost swollen shut. Or pretty much was. I'm not sure how much visibility he had. He had a hand injury as well about the 8th round. So he was battling through, trying to stay in the fight. He just didn't really have much left. After about round 8, there wasn't a lot on those punches. And Fury himself was starting to tire, quite badly as well. He had to sort of conserve his energy and rode out the storm. And he was there to knock out Deontay Wilder in 11 rounds. So Dark Corner Production says, this was like a movie scenario fight. You couldn't predict it early on. Many knockdowns between both. For sure, one of the best boxing matches of all time. Tyson Fury is a machine, the greatest. I don't know if I'd say it's one of the best boxing matches of all time, but certainly it was a very good fight. Some of these things, when you immediately after the fight, we were all too close to it. But, what I will say is it was a great fight. It was, I think, came better than advertised. I think given what happened in the rematch, a lot of people didn't have optimism that this was going to be competitive. But it was competitive in spots. Obviously Deontay Wilder starting strong with his boxing. Outboxed Tyson Fury in that first round. I gave him that first round easily. And then Deontay Wilder, after taking a bit of punishment in round 3, getting dropped, right hand and uppercut sends him to the canvas, rallies and comes back and drops Fury twice in round 4. I mean, that is the sort of stuff of a movie script, that's for sure. It's just that the fight was obviously too many rounds and he couldn't sort of keep it up. Dangerfield says, out on his shield. He got pummeled. We went out on his shield, that's for sure. That's what he said he wanted to do, and he did. Moore says, hello everyone. Hello to you too. Tommy Pickle said, reminded me of Bo vs. Gallotta style beating. IMAX it, football, like the hit button, quality content. Yes, please. Wherever you're watching in the world, morning, noon, or night, that would be appreciated. So, given the sort of caliber of the fight, I mean, it was unexpectedly good. I mean, I didn't really know what to expect, but I was hoping that Deontay Wilder was going to be better, he was going to be more competitive, and we were going to see something that we wanted to see. Because, let's face it, paying wherever you are in the world pay-per-view is, you want a good card, you want a good main event, and this delivered. Lots of drama, and obviously Tyson Fury retains the title. So I'm not going to discuss things like what next for Deontay Wilder. I'll save that for other videos. I'll need to sort of let that sort of sit for a couple of days and, do some stuff this week just to think about it. But in terms of Fury, it's likely his next fight is going to be against Dillian Whyte. Potentially. So the WBC has put in a ruling, but Whyte has to get past Otto Wallin. But if he doesn't, if he loses, and he's got a rematch clause, he'll have to rematch Otto Wallin. So, undisputed, that's not something we can talk about at this point because Anthony Joshua's triggered his rematch clause with Alexander Usyk. So maybe there will be a voluntary, we'll have to see, but if Whyte wins against Wallin, Whyte will be the next opponent. But, we have to sort of see what happens at the end of this month. They've given this 30-day period to just sort of basically decide what's going to happen next. And that's the leeway to let the Dillian Whyte fight happen. So Mr. Higgins says, Kovnatski, the tenderized Polish sausage. So those undercard fights, not going to cover in this stream. May not do videos on them tonight. I'll just sort of let them sort of sit. Been up watching this boxing all day, plus some of the other stuff earlier from Europe. So I will do some coverage. But yeah, disappointing from Adam Kovnatski. Disappointing from F.A. Ajagba. Dangerfield says, that's a fair point. I expected more stamina in Wilder. I think many people did. Well, like I said in the pre-fight video after the weigh-in, 238 was a 6-round strategy. That if you're coming in that heavy, you're not used to it, you're already like heavily muscled up top, it was going to be a case that he was going to gas at some point, and he did. I mean, I think we could all see that coming. De Struffen, sorry, I just botched that, says, let's not forget we paid for this fight by enduring soap opera style drama for what felt like ages. And it did. It did. There was a lot of ridiculousness. At least there was a good ending for fans here. It was a case that build-up very acrimonious, but, I enjoyed the fight in the end, and I think it was better than people expected. Hanef says, I don't think Fury has any real competition in the division, but it would still be fun to watch Wilder beat Usyk, AJ, and White. See, I think the whole narrative that Fury doesn't have any competition is potentially overstated, because if you can get someone like an Alexander Usyk in against him, it's a completely different fight. He would be competitive against Fury. It's a totally different fight than this sort of fight, which, let's face it, Tyson Fury came forward most of the fight and just tried to bulldoze Deontay Wilder. One of the things he did really well was, try to tire Wilder out in those clinches, just tying him up, putting the head round his neck, leaning on him when he's on the ropes, just press against him. It was something that you could see Wilder's gas tank just, visibly depleting. And yeah, Tyson Fury knew that his best chance was to press on the front foot and keep Wilder going backwards, because he doesn't have good balance. And even though I'm sure that they worked on this during training camp, you didn't really see much of an improvement from Deontay Wilder with his back foot game. When he was being pressed upon, I think in the first round or two, when he was working the jab, that was giving Fury something to think about. He looked better then. But for the rest of the fight, after about round 3 or 4, it was sort of, reverting to type, and he was obviously very tired. But he put in a shift, Deontay Wilder. He is still one of the best heavyweights in the world. I know some people won't like hearing that, but if you say that he's not, you can't give Fury any credit. He put in a performance that I think was better than the rematch, and he said he was going to do that, and we have to commend him for doing so. He wasn't able to be victorious tonight, but he can still have some good fights in the heavyweight division. I think Tyson Fury and what he brought, the style, the skills, it's just too much for Deontay Wilder, and that was proved again. And pretty knocked out in brutal fashion in the end as well. Tyson Fury didn't really seem to respect him, especially in that second half of the fight, just ploughing forward and putting a beating on him. So it'll be interesting to see some of the fallout from this. Tyson Fury said that Wilder wouldn't shake his hand, and there is bad blood there, and some of Deontay Wilder's very fanatical supporters won't like what they've seen. I mean, they've had a lot invested in him, the excuses and the other bits and pieces. But let's face it, there were a couple of things that happened this week that, you had JD's going back into the corner. You also had the gloves, Wilder kicking up a stink. I've got a few thoughts on that sort of stuff, which I'll save for Patreon. But getting back to your comments here, the chat is moving very quickly, so apologies if I do miss it. Sean says, if you didn't think that was an amazing fight, you don't know shit about boxing. It was a great fight. The drama, the back and forth, the seesaw action. I mean, this is why we watch boxing. This is the sort of fights we want. It might have only been for 6 rounds where that was super competitive and back and forth and, edge of the seat stuff. And at the point where Deontay Wilder's tank, just completely emptied, Tyson Fury took over, put a beating on. But it was a dramatic fight. One of the best in recent memory. Body Snatcher says, everyone include you, Boxing Squared, talking of gas tank. Was it gassed or taking too much punches? I think the latter. Well, it's a combination of both. I mean, Deontay Wilder, with the heavy muscling, he put on extra muscle and weight and all that sort of stuff. He was never going to be able to keep up a strategy of throwing a lot of punches and, jabs to the body and really working Tyson Fury over with that sort of strategy, for 12 rounds. It was designed to be able to, be more physical, try to put it on Tyson Fury. It's a combination. He was taking punches, that was taking out of him. But also, we saw in that second fight, it was a combination of the sort of strategy. It just didn't work in the end. But it is a case, it's not just punishment alone. Tom says, bets on Wilder's future excuses. Well, let's hope that there isn't that. Because if there is, then obviously I think that will actually hurt Deontay Wilder and his legacy further. A lot of people didn't, like what they heard after that second fight. Thought it was ridiculous. Sure, there was a small section that thought, there was something in that. But obviously, we've just seen it again. It wasn't a fluke. Tyson Fury beat up Deontay Wilder and knocked him out. Dropped him multiple times. Deontay Wilder was in that fight. He put up a good effort. but beaten by the better fighter. Punch Quote says, wow, he stopped Wilder late. I actually thought, given how fatigued Wilder was, that it was on for about the sort of 7th round, after about round 6. But Fury himself, he was gassing a little bit as well. In round 8 in particular, he took a minute or so off. He was, he was looking a bit weary as well. And you could sort of see that his shape, it was breaking down too. But of the two, he was clearly the more fresher and could have kept going rounds. God of War says, fights make fights. People also said Usyk has no chance in the heavyweight division. We only know when the bell rings. What's a fight that I want to see it? Joaquin says, White not going to get through Wallin yet. White's chin now suspect. Well, that's another good fight. I have seen a narrative, some people saying that White will now duck Otto Wallin, but I think that's a silly narrative because White has picked Wallin for this fight. It's a pay-per-view fight. He doesn't get paid if he doesn't have the fight. Ed Tutul says Wilder will sack himself for falling over too much. Adere says, did you see my message? What message? Not sure what that's about. Stout Bordeaux says, that's what happens when you get trained by an opponent you beat training you. Well, I think actually Malik Scott did a decent job. You could see improvements. Wilder did look improved early on. He just couldn't keep it up, reverted to type. And a lot of us expected at some point that was going to happen. And when he was getting tired, he was getting sloppy, it was what it was. Dangerfield says, got a dash. Thanks, Boxing Squared. You got a sub from me tonight. Thanks for joining the stream and participating wherever you are, morning, noon, or night. Thank you for joining another Boxing Squared live stream. This was an entertaining fight. I enjoyed it. Unexpectedly so. I mean, I had been warming up to the closer this fight got, I'd warmed up to it happening, and I was intrigued. How was Deontay Wilder going to look? Was he going to look any better? What were we going to see from Wilder? And we saw it early on. And Tyson Fury obviously was like, okay, well, just see how this is going. He didn't want to, he was just downloading information, seeing what Wilder was doing. But obviously by that second round, he thought, okay, I know what he's about here. He made his adjustments. And basically every time he touched him with that right hand afterwards, it seemed to rock Deontay Wilder. He really did put it on Wilder. And obviously a little bit of a flap ahead of the fight in the final sort of 24 hours with the gloves, all that sort of stuff. Deontay Wilder trying to claim that Fury was wearing or attempting to wear illegal gloves, horsehair. But and even telling the Nevada State Athletic Commission that they didn't know what they were doing, which I did find quite amusing. Mr. Higgins says, I like the straight right hand to the body Wilder was using early. Yeah, and if he was able to sort of keep that up, I think that would have been effective to start draining Fury. It's just that he didn't keep it up. Aunt Tifa says, okay, Uros Bond says, Fury's conditioning was better in the second fight, or else Wilder would have lost earlier without a doubt. Yeah, I mean, I think that was one of the things people had a question heading into this fight. Where was Fury really at? He was at a career heavyweight ahead of this fight, 277, but he looked like he had a few more bits of, garments on, and who knows if there was anything in the pockets or that sort of thing. Tyson Fury does like to use misdirection, use mental tactics and mind games, get people thinking. I mean, he kind of looked roughly the same in terms of condition, but yeah, I'm not sure if he was as fit. But then again, he took, I think, more punishment in this fight from Deontay Wilder. Those first couple of rounds of bodywork would have taken something out of him. Obviously, dropped twice in that fourth round as well. That would have taken a bit out of him as well. Punch quotes, just moving to Liam says, still want to see Wilder versus Joshua, Ruiz, White and Parker. Look, any mix of these heavyweights is what we've all been calling for ages, but the problem is you have these promotional issues and considerations. And let's face it, one of the reasons this trilogy was initiated in the first place was Tyson Fury was making a comeback, all that sort of stuff. And even Deontay Wilder has said, and Shelley Finkel has said, they thought that Tyson Fury wouldn't be as good as he was in that first fight. But obviously he came into that first fight after 6 months of his comeback, put in a decent shift. There was a draw, controversial. The beatdown he delivered in the second. And now I think this was maybe the most memorable of the three fights because of the back and forth, the drama, what happened, the knockdowns. It had a little bit of everything. I mean, it wasn't just one-sided. I mean, maybe that's just, I've just seen the fight and it's obviously 18, 19, 20 months, whatever it was since the second fight, but I really enjoyed this. Andre says, I don't think Fury was at his best. Teddy B Midwest Sports Talk says, watched it at the movies and the atmosphere was insane. I bet it was. I'd love to watch one of those fights in that sort of closed circuit environment at a movie theatre. People would just be going nuts. You'd feel like you're in the crowd. Special Case is great card. Ajagba, Kovnatsky and Wilder all exposed. Yes, exposed. So I'll talk about some of the other guys that you just mentioned there in other videos, not in this one. Yezer says, make Wilder versus Ruiz. Well, that actually could be part of the what next for Deontay Wilder, because let's face it, who is he going to sort of come back against now? Ruiz has looked somewhat vulnerable as well. It's probably the biggest fight they can make in the PBC stable. Deontay Wilder's got no claim on the WBC title anymore, no in to get a shot at it, and he'll have to take some fights and rebuild. Otherwise, the alternative option is retire. I don't think after that people should be saying retire, because he put in a credible effort. Obviously, he was beaten by a better fighter, but he can still be in exciting fights, and he's dangerous. We saw that, dropping Tyson Fury. And I said ahead of this fight, was this going to be one of those? Because if you keep giving Wilder a chance to land the right hand, he can land it. And he did in this fight, obviously dropping him twice. The second knockdown, not so much of a knockdown there. It was, heavy. It was more from that first one. But that was a peach of a right hand that hit Fury. And Fury's powers of recovery, pretty decent. TopHeavyweights.com. If you haven't followed his website, do check it out. It covers the heavyweights online. Who ranks higher in the world, Wilder or Joshua? It's an interesting question. I'd probably need to think about that, but I think at the moment, at least, it's Fury and then Usyk. And then after that, a mix of Wilder, Joshua, then you've got your whites and a bundle of other fighters. Sort of from about 5 or 6 to about 15, there's a lot of guys and much of a muchness you can sort of plug in there. Andy Ruiz says, Tyson Fury has Muhammad Ali's soul in him. He's a different breed from other boxers. Morpheus says, Fury was showing some tiredness, weariness after getting dropped at times 2 in the 4th, but that was understandable. He will never have a beautiful body, but has great natural strength, endurance, and stamina. Yeah. Niv says, what are your thoughts on their weight gain, particularly Wilder? Well, sort of covered this a little bit early on. This was not a good idea in my view, and I said it in my pre-fight video, the one after the weigh-in, that this shaped as a 6-round strategy for Deontay Wilder. Come in there, I thought he was always going to have a look for a round or 2 and then start going for it. And that's pretty much what we saw. And by 6 rounds, even by 4 rounds, he was breathing in heavy between the rounds. But after 6, he was pretty much, out. He was gassed. And Tyson Fury, from that point onwards, it was just all Fury all of the time. There were a few moments of success for Deontay Wilder every now and then, but just not a lot on his punches. Fury's back bottoms were beautiful. Certainly that was a topic of discussion in the build-up, and people were questioning Fury's motivation. And I'm going to talk about Fury's motivation as part of a piece that I'll be doing on Patreon. But yeah, I think it would have been harder for him to get up for this. Deontay Wilder wasn't biting. Mustafa says, Sugar Hill, what a great trainer to have in your corner. And I think, obviously, the relationship they've forged and what he's bringing out in Tyson Fury in terms of his aggression, that really has been a partnership that has worked well. Steven says Wilder should fight one of the others because a win against him would prove he's not just been fighting bums all of his career. Bums all of his career is probably not quite a fair comment, but could he have fought better opposition during his WBC? Luis Ortiz, good fighter, but some of the other fighters on his resume, it wasn't the fights fans wanted when he probably should have been having better fights. But obviously he couldn't do anything about Alexander Povetkin popping dirty in 2016, and that would have been, if he could have got that win, a career-defining win. But coulda, shoulda, woulda, obviously. Rewise says, so frustrating to see the commentators overlooking Usyk and just crowning Fury as the #1 heavyweight when Usyk took 3 belts off the more proven guy who's actually fought all of his mandatories. They were quite dismissive. I was getting the international feed, which was Ray Flores and also Christina Poncha. Flores very dismissive of Usyk, and yeah, just basically saying Tyson Fury dog walks him. Morgan, 1985, says Scott was telling him to push Fury back after they clinch. Well, I mean, at certain points early in the fight, he might have been able to do that, but later on, he just couldn't. He was too tired, and Tyson Fury had almost 40 pounds of weight on him. And if you're tired and someone who's bigger than you, who's taller and heavier is leaning down on you, and your legs are trying to support a heavy frame that's tired, yeah, he just wasn't able to implement some of what Scott wanted to implement. I'm getting way behind in the chat here, so I'll just catch back up here. So Chris says, too bad Wilder has no sportsmanship. Yeah, that is a bit of a bad taste, not being able to at least shake Fury's hand, something like that. I mean, we'll have to see what happens in the coming days, weeks or months, what he's going to come out with. Will he disappear for a while? Is he going to make a statement congratulating Fury? Maybe it's just one of those things, the disappointment. I mean, he was knocked out after all. He said he was a king and he was going to return two-time, all that sort of stuff. There was a lot of bravado in the build-up. And ultimately, he got beaten pretty badly, knocked out. Special Case says, looked like Wilder broke his hand using those horsehair gloves. And this is something that I wanted to talk about in my Patreon video, which so I don't want to touch on it too much here, but you had Edgar Berlanga. He was pushed pretty hard by Caceres, and actually Caceres, who fought Billy Joe Saunders, that win for Saunders looks a little better now. I think people were just writing him off as nothing, but obviously looked a bit better. Okay, where are we? The chat is moving very quickly. Moore says Wilder did look a bit drunk early. Well, he's taking a lot of punches to the head. That will happen. Krasen says, after this main event, we all know the small Usyk is the best heavyweight. Rangi says, beast. Antifa says, Malik going to take the blame this time. Well, I mean, I think we could see improvements, but it is a case there's going to have to be some self-reflection. Deontay Wilder wasn't good enough. Didn't beat Tyson Fury, and arguably didn't beat him in any of the fights. That first one where it was a draw, a lot of people thought that Tyson Fury, despite the 2 knockdowns, won 8 rounds, so would claim it by a couple of rounds on the scorecard. It was what it was, the draw. We can't get that one back. Tyson Fury decimated him in the second fight, and this was a fun, competitive fight, but ultimately Wilder knocked out in brutal fashion. You would have seen by the thumbnail from this live stream. He obviously was put down hard in the 11th round of the fight. So Tyson Fury defends the WBC title for the first time. Defends the lineal title, defends the Ring Magazine title. I think, after this, that it is Tyson Fury. But, we got to see these guys fight, and let's hope that they do. So Andre says, hi from Cape Town. Hello to you in South Africa. Yo Daddy says, Wilder fans a crybaby. I'm from America, and I couldn't wait for Fury to beat his ass. Well, I guess you got what you were wanting. I made you read this. Wilder KOs AJ. AJ has average weak chin, mentally weak, no head movement. If Wilder could land on Fury, he could land on AJ. Wilder destroys AJ. Okay, I'm not sure why you're talking about Wilder and Joshua after Wilder just got decimated. I think one of the things that was very evident is that there was zero head movement from Deontay Wilder throughout this fight. He was just a target ready to be popped. There was very little head movement. And if that was the case against Joshua, well, there's no guarantees that he's not wearing something there either. But that's another fight for another day. We never got it. I mean, these guys never fought each other. You can't give Deontay Wilder credit or talk about he's going to knock this guy out when they could have made the fight and never happened. It's a shame. We should have had that fight for Undisputed 3 years ago. The division could have looked so different if we had that fight. As it is now, they all held out, more money, whatever, promotional issues, boxing politics. They pissed it away. We didn't get it. Crafty Boxing says it was a masterpiece. Uncovers Light, what an edge of your seat fight. Yeah, those first rounds, it was, I was really impressed by that first round by Wilder. He put on a good display, using that jab, those tools that Malik Scott had sharpened. You could see the improvements, but ultimately just couldn't keep it up. El Max says, congrats to Fury, great fight. Wilder was a warrior, but he wasn't good enough. And I know some people are trying to come in here, wade in, dump on Wilder, but you have to say, he put in a shift. He didn't give up. Ultimately, he was injured later in the fight. He was gassed for half for it. He kept coming. He even had some late spots of success, but ultimately, like he said he wanted to, he went out on a shield. That eye injury or that eye swelling up didn't look good. His hand, hand or arm, it certainly did look injured after the 8th round. Yeah, good fight. Ed Too Tall says Wilder versus Malik rematch next. No, thank you. So, how are we? So we're, it says that I'm only 2 minutes into the stream, so obviously something's happened here. But anyway, I will wrap this up in the next couple of minutes. So get your final comments and thoughts in here. Big Boys Boxing. So Kiwi Box says, what a fight. Will Wilder attend the post-fight presser? Wouldn't shake Fury's hand, so I say no. Well, I've missed everything since Tyson Fury started singing Blue Suede Shoes, so not sure what has been happening in terms of the press conference. TLJX Tuxedo, not sure. Very dynamic styles between the two, but the truth is Wilder's only chances against Fury was the KO or knockdowns leading to a decision win. He could not beat Fury by outboxing him. He tried early and obviously tried something different, had some success, but I think Tyson Fury, the aggression from him, coming forward, pushing Wilder back, making him uncomfortable. Wilder can't fight on the back foot. He's got no back foot game. Doesn't, have the same sort of leverage and power on his punches when he is trying to punch off the back foot. He did have some success at times, but obviously Tyson Fury, deliberate strategy to push him back. And when Wilder did have success, obviously it was on the front foot. But I don't want to go over everything we've already sort of covered earlier in the stream. So Dominic says that math doesn't add up. Fury beating Wilder doesn't mean he beat AJ, and AJ beating Usyk doesn't mean he beats Fury. Triangle theory so often do not work out in boxing. I mean, just look at Kovnatsky, Robert Helenius, and Gerald Washington. Different fights and different winners. Luke Bignell says Wilder gassed out because he was putting everything into every punch. He showed big balls and heart to see it to the 11th round. Certainly did. Daniel says, big up squared, a lot of people in the chat. So 391, thank you wherever you are in the world, morning, noon or night. Smash that like button on the way in or the way out. Talking about this fight. It really was unexpectedly good. I mean, I expected it to be better than the rematch. It could only be an improvement because obviously that was so one-sided. And Wilder showed improvement. He showed heart. Ultimately, he took a beating and got taken out in that 11th round. Fury defends his title. Luke says that Wilder retires after that. Tommy says Wilder is at the hospital. XXX Deadly Havoc. I don't think Malik can be faulted tonight. That's the best I've seen Wilder. I don't know why Fury didn't have his usual head movement defense. We showed it in patches, but sometimes he was just sort of sticking his chin out there. A couple of, occasions where, you're thinking, is he going to get clipped here? And ultimately, a couple of times he did in that 4th round. Streffenkampf, I'm sorry, I'm just butchering that, says, I stayed up for your post-fight analysis. Both fights and stream were worth the sleepless night. Cheers from Germany. Well, thank you for joining the stream and obviously staying up and listening to this. So it says I'm only 5 minutes into the stream. I think there's been a couple of Wi-Fi issues or something. I'm not sure. I do have to jet off soon to because I'm on making dinner tonight. We're coming close to 7 p.m. I'm not going to be the most popular if I don't get out of this soon. But we'll take a few more minutes worth of comments. But wherever you are in the world, joining the stream here, I do appreciate it. The support is appreciated. And what a fight we had. I enjoyed that. And I don't want to say it saved the card, but certainly it enhanced it because it was a good card on paper. Some of the fights, the heavyweight fights, didn't pan out. There was some unexpectedly good action for some of the fights that were considered tune-ups. Julian Williams got upset. Edgar Berlanga obviously had some trouble. He got dropped as well. Liam says it seemed like Fury carried Wilder to those last few rounds. Wilder looked ready to go after the 8th. Well, I think there was also Fury, as I sort of commented on the time on Twitter. He was looking weary. He took sort of half the 8th round off. I think he needed that respite. Even though Wilder was still there, still, punching and mostly sort of didn't have much on those punches or was missing wildly. Fury needed just a few moments just to get some, get a bit of a second win. So Dylan Hull says Wilder's ear's bleeding again. Yeah, I saw that. I wonder what certain people are going to be saying about that. Andy says, I think Wilder trained well for him to play to his own strengths. Maybe Fury trained slightly wrong for his opponent, as I felt he was too heavy. Well, he was effectively the same amount as he was for the last fight. He had a little bit more clothing on for this one. I mean, maybe there was misdirection in terms of the weigh-in. I mean, we'll have to see what Fury says in the coming days or weeks in terms of that sort of stuff. Sideshow Bob says he's glad that Wilder got banged again. AJ says, I love your videos. Keep it up. Thank you for that comment, supporting the channel. Wherever you are, morning in the world, I should say. Thank you for joining the stream. Thank you for supporting the videos on a continual basis. I do appreciate it. You know, if no one's watching the videos, you know, it's sort of hard to keep making them. But Luke says, I'm getting my popcorn out for the conspiracy theories coming from the LDBC in the next few days. Well, let's just hope that there is some rational thinking that comes to the fore, because we saw basically, for parts of that fight, a carbon copy of the second fight. Wilder was competitive, more competitive in spots in that fight, but actually eerily similar, like I think the third round knockdowns. There was also Wilder bleeding from the ear. Some of that sort of stuff is shades of the second fight. I mean, I think for about 3 or 4 days last time, some of the real fanatical Deontay Wilder fans went into hiding. But after that, obviously, the excuses started coming up, you know, thick and fast, including from Wilder himself at the time. So he said he wouldn't consider Tyson Fury the WBC champion until they had this fight. So whether he does now, hard to know. He didn't want to shake Fury's hand afterwards, which, you know, not great in terms of the sportsmanship element, but obviously he's hurting right now. He just got, you know, knocked out in pretty brutal fashion. Took a sustained beating for the second half of that fight. He really did take a lot of damage, a lot of punishment. He's got a hell of a chin. You can't fault him for his determination. He is a warrior, but obviously he fell short. So Sideshow Bob says Parker would bang Wilder too. I don't know about that. I mean, Joseph Parker doesn't really have a lot of power. I'm not sure that Parker would take too many of those shots from Wilder. We've got it proven that Fury does have great powers of recovery. We saw it again tonight. Max says Wilder improved, but Fury is better. Yeah, I mean, I guess that sort of sums up the ultimate end of this trilogy. You know, Wilder just wasn't as good as Fury, and that's sort of shown out across the 3 fights overall. Donald says, big fans of the videos, good job, thank you for that. Jim says, I was one of those who said I didn't want the third fight, but man, that was an awesome fight. And I think a lot of us felt the same, but I think one of the things that helped was the gap in the end. I think the time, if it had happened 3 or 4 months after the initial fight, I think there wouldn't have been as much interest, but it felt like there was an increasing amount of interest the further the gap between the 2 fights. And by the time that this, actually crept up, I was really looking, as I said in videos in Fight Week, really looking forward to this fight. And ultimately, it lived up to the billing. It was a trilogy-worthy fight, one of the best sort of heavyweight fights for a couple of years. So Breezy says, Breezy Gas, thank you for the super chat. He says, who do you think is the best heavyweight outside of Fury, Wilder, Joshua, and Usyk? Well, I think based on recent fights and performances, you have to put guys like Joe Joyce, Andy Ruiz, Dillian White, sort of in that next sort of, cabal of fighters. Joseph Parker, Luis Ortiz. I mean, like I say, from about 6 to about 15, there's a lot of very talented heavyweights that are on about the same level. And I think if you put them all in together and had a bit of a fight off, you get different results depending on who was matched with who. And I think most people are saying White there is their sort of consensus as the guy after them. And he's certainly part of that pack. Shannon says, let's see what Wilder and his fanboys say. Get the excuse book out. Jasper says, this fight was better than Joshua versus Klitschko. Probably the best fight in years since George Foreman. Stephen Grice says, Fury in almost every department. Ed All says Big Dave. Not sure what that's about. Punch Quote says, so last few comments. I believe when the smoke clears in the generation, AJ will be considered the best of the generation. Having a gauntlet resume and taking early defeats like Vlad and Lennox will pay off. Well, he's got a challenge in front of him. He needs to beat Alexander Usyk in the rematch. Obviously, after that first fight, it's a tough task, a tall order, considering what we saw. Not impossible, but he needs to get back to the drawing board, and trying to outbox the boxer obviously is not going to work. Stoned Alligator says, what a shame Wilder acted unsportsmanlike after the fight. Dylan Hull, Joe Joyce, gotta be. Porno says, way too much clinching. Well, obviously, that was part of Fury's strategy as well. Try to tire him out, wear him out, gas him out. And it was a decent part of what, led to Wilder's gas tank depleting. He was exuding on him that 40-pound weight advantage that he had over him. And that's what he did in the second fight. It was largely the same sort of template from fight to fight. But obviously, he got dropped twice in this one. But a lot of action, a lot of seesaw. Loved it. These are the sort of fights that we want to see more and more often, that we're just not seeing enough. Too many guys protecting those, too many guys, just in-house fights against subpar opponents, tune-up opponents. I'm going to say this now, and I've said this back in June. This is the worst year for the heavyweight division for some time. But we have had some bright spots in recent weeks. Obviously, Usyk and Joshua, compelling fight. This one, Fury and Wilder, the Trilogy fight, it was a compelling fight. We need this more of the time. There's a reason boxing is such a niche sport now. Sure, people come out for the big fights, but we would have more people supporting boxing and getting into the sport and continuing to stick with the sport if you actually had good fights all of the time. There's a reason the UFC has started to, or has overtaken boxing in many sort of different categories. Maybe not in what fighters get paid, but at the end of the day, you want people supporting the sport, not it becoming this fringe element type thing. But this was a good advertisement for the sport. Good fight. Punch Quote says, talking to someone else, Goated Reloaded Animation says, Fury was the better man tonight, but WTF, what was that slow count when he got knocked down in the second time in the fourth? Stephen Grice says, Lennox could box and had power. BZ Gas says, could Dave Allen drop Fury with a body shot? I mean, heavyweight, who knows? Would have to land that first. Paul says, okay, talking about Lennox Lewis, 2022 going to be a banger. Well, I'll just say this about the heavyweight division. Obviously, a heavyweight channel. The rise and fall on my channel is based off how good the schedule is for heavyweight boxing. And this has not been a good year for heavyweight boxing. 2020 wasn't a great year for heavyweight boxing. We've had a few bright spots, but for several months we haven't had much really to talk about. There hasn't been many good fights made, many good fights that have just sort of panned out that, oh yeah, this was good matchmaking. So these sorts of fights give me hope that we're going to get more. But to say that 2022 is going to be a banger, we've kind of been predicting every year is going to be better than the last, or a good year, or better than this one, for about 3 or 4 years now. There's been a sort of at the top of the division, and I've spoken about this in Patreon before, you've had Fury, Wilder, Joshua tying up the top end, and you've had fighters below that not taking different fights and taking on risk because they want to see how things play out at the top end, because their livelihood and potential next fights and potential title shots, hinge on what happens there. So there's a trickle-down effect that's knocked on to the rest of the division. But it was great to see fights like F.A. Ajagba and Frank Sanchez, two guys unbeaten, putting it on the line there. Didn't go well for F.A. Ajagba, and I'll discuss that elsewhere in a different video, but we need more of those sorts of fights. We never know how good these guys are until they get in the ring. It's no point saying this guy beats that guy and just sort of, screaming about it for years if these guys are never realistically going to get in the ring. So let's hope that we can build off what we've got, but it's boxing, so it's a cruel mistress. It will deliver something up like this and then disappoint us for weeks or months on end. But at least it was a good trilogy, a good end to the trilogy. There is some finality about this trilogy. Anyway, we'll wrap it up there. My stream says I've only been going for 16 minutes, but that can't be right. But what did you make of it all? Did you enjoy this fight? I think it was one of the better fights we've had for quite some time. We don't get a lot of trilogies, but this was a good final decider. And Tyson Fury retains his belt, retains the WBC title, defends it for the first time, knocks out Deontay Wilder.